All right, everybody, welcome to the stream. Thanks for joining for the live. Sleuth Mom, thanks for promoing my video. Got my sound check in. I can hear myself real good, too good. Okay, so over the course of just watching and covering these cases, it seems like homeschooling is quickly becoming more prominent in a lot of the cases where there's severe abuse and neglect, and even as we saw in Ariel's case, the death of a child. So I wanted to touch on that, kind of go into how homeschooling works, why it's such a danger to children who are subject to abuse, and just kick around some ideas of what can be done to change that, to better protect children who are homeschooled. I don't want to jump right into all the bad stuff, so I wanted to share some of the positives about homeschooling. The terpenes are definitely on the list. The cases that I'm going to highlight uh, in this series, because I plan on doing this as a series, the cases that I'm going to highlight are going to be the Turpin children, the Wimbush children, Dakota Collins, Ariel Sellers, and Imani Moss. I don't want to dredge up like a ton of cases because from what I can see, it pretty much all goes the same way. A child is abused, the abuse gets worse, the abuser decides to basically hide the child and the abuse from the public eye. Ding, 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 homeschooling. And after that, there's a lack of contact with mandatory reporters, doctors, teachers, counselors, people who would be required to report if they could see anything off. Um, and after that, it's basically just free access. It's like an all access pass to just do these kids however the abuser feels like they want to do the kid. But before we get into the negative, because in the true crime community, we cover so much negative and we see so much horrible suffering that I don't want to just kind of harp on that. I want to say that homeschooling is an excellent resource. Uh, Depending on your situation, you may have a child who has learning disabilities and who doesn't really benefit as much as they could from traditional public schooling or private schooling, a rigorous curriculum. You may have a child who excels in one area but has a really hard time in another area. And so with homeschooling, it gives you the flexibility to be able to say, well, my child is 3 and is reading on par with 5 year olds. So I'm going to give them reading, but they're struggling with learning how to count well. So we're going to focus more on math and math principles. It gives you the flexibility to allow the child to work at their own pace, to learn in a way that's suited to their abilities and their own unique personalities. I know when I was in school, I I was decent at math, but I could not do math the way it was taught because I didn't and I still don't see numbers the same way that it's taught. Um, as much as I tried to follow follow the instructions that were given by the teachers on how to solve the problem, I still could not solve the problem in that same way. I even recall just a few years ago, I had someone who saw me doing subtraction, and the way that I did it, they were like, "God, that's so weird." Um, I'm not going to go into explaining it all, but some people just don't learn the way others learn. Some are visual learners, some are hands-on learners. Um, Homeschooling gives you that flexibility to tailor the curriculum to the child's abilities and needs. Uh, Even right here in the true crime community, we can see with Red, White, and Bethune, they travel the country in their RV and they have small children. Homeschooling is perfectly adaptable to alternate lifestyles. to alternate schedules. Uh, it also, I think, encourages relationships between parents and children, because that's more time that you're spending with your child. Um, More things that you can come up with that will interest your child and educate them and allow you to spend quality time together with field trips or whatever the case may be. So there are definitely some good points to homeschooling. Uh, Statistically speaking, children who are properly homeschooled tend to do better academically, to have more success in college, because they have developed their study habits differently. They've learned a level of independence and just following their own way that they need to do things in order to be able to absorb information, apply it, and succeed academically. Yes, Arctic Fox, homeschooling is definitely a godsend in, I want to say, the majority of situations. So, the first thing I want to talk about homeschooling, one reason that homeschooling is such an appealing alternative to abusers is because there's a lack of oversight. When children attend public or private schools, or when they attend some type of distance learning where there's a video class time requirement, they are exposed to teachers, counselors, and others who would be able to notice that, hey, this kid is off, she's not, or he's not their normal self. Um, to notice small things, not necessarily a glaring black eye, but when a child is in a classroom setting, a teacher may be able to see that, hey, she's got a limp, or hey, he's not quite using his hands the way he normally does. He looks uncomfortable. Maybe there's something I need to check out. Let me send him to the nurse. Even in video classes, um, an astute teacher who is paying attention to the children still gets a familiarity with the children, their normal routines, their normal habits, their normal background noises, and would be able to notice if something was off. And hi, Karen. But with homeschooling, all of that is taken off the table. You can effectively isolate a child completely from society through homeschooling, which is what we saw in the case of the Turpin's children and in the case of the Wimbush children and Dakota Collins. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Dakota Collins's case, but this child was effectively completely cut off from the rest of the world. There were all manner of horrific abuses that were going on towards him, some so unspeakable that I will not mention them in my live, because it makes me physically ill to think about the things that were done to him by his own father, and all through the guise of homeschooling. And in Dakota's case, he wasn't receiving any type of education at all. He was just locked in an attic and abused. Um, Requirements. For the most part, if a person chooses to homeschool, there are no state requirements for education levels, for curriculum. Um, there's no requirement that this child has to present to any type of accountability organization, such as school or school boards or online testing or anything. There's no requirement to present or show any proof that a child has learned anything, done any book work, had any exposure to subject matter. So there isn't even any accountability or verification that the child is still even alive or around or in the state or any of that. There are no requirements for educational backgrounds of the parents in most cases, even a minimum of a high school diploma. So there are no requirements that even if the child is actually being educated to some degree, that they're receiving any quality of education. Um, we saw in the case of the Turpin children, that their parents, all they had to do was just basically fill out paperwork saying, "My home is a school. I'm the principal." The father was listed as the principal, and the mother, I believe, was listed as the teacher. They didn't teach these kids anything. They The only thing they really taught the kids was, if anyone ever asks, "You're in this grade, you're in that grade, you're in that grade." Those children, some of the older children had been in public school uh, for a few years and had learned some things, and those children taught the other younger children what they could teach them as far as reading, counting, colors, etc. Um, we saw when the one daughter of the Turpins escaped. If you've ever had a chance to listen to the recording where she was speaking with the officer that she made contact with, and even the 911 call, she had a noticeably odd speech pattern because she was never exposed to other people to just speech. Um, it was almost to the point that it was like an accent, the way that she phrased terms, the way that she said things, the name. She didn't even realize the correct names to call basic things. She didn't know what a street sign was. Excuse me. I don't know. Focused. So, with homeschooling, I pulled up some stuff about uh, state requirements, and I pulled it up per state based on the 5 cases that we're really going to go in depth in over the course of talking about homeschooling and abuse. The first thing I pulled up here is from Gwinnett County, Georgia, which is where the Wimbush children were abused under the guise of homeschooling. And I cannot remember off the top of my head for the Wimbush children. So we're going to pull this up. Okay, 2014, Georgia, in changing the requirements for homeschooling. So let's read this. It says homeschool information. The 2012 legislative session created House Bills 39 and 706 effective July 1st, 2012. The new legislation moves the responsibility of homeschool student reporting and management from the local school system to the Georgia Department of Education. The Georgia Department of Education, GADOE, has developed a web-based system to efficiently comply with the new requirements. Parents and guardians are strongly encouraged to use the web-based system to submit their homeschool declaration of internet and of intent and attendance records. The Georgia Department of Education web-based system is located, and it gives a link to where to go for that. Additional information about homeschooling and how to submit homeschool documentation is also available on the homeschool webpage. And I went to that webpage, and there's really not a whole lot there. It basically tells you how to sign up for homeschooling. That link takes you to a page where you can submit your intent or your declaration, basically saying to the school district that, hey, I want to homeschool my kid. Um, as far as requirements for educational levels, curriculum, there's a website called timeforlearning.com. That's time and the number for learning.com. I would suggest that if you're interested in this topic and you want to do some research on your own, that you could go to this website. It has a lot of good information state by state as far as requirements, how to's, different types of homeschooling, and you can do your own research on this. Now, the thing about homeschooling is there are different ways that you can choose to homeschool your kid. And those different types of homeschooling will really dictate how much exposure to the outside world and other people that the child has. There are hybrids as well. There are also homeschool co ops. And when someone is genuinely choosing to homeschool their children for all the right reasons and are actually committed to their child's education, uh, there are options out there that allow for socialization, exposure to other people, exposure to other children. Um, there are options where some parents may act as the teacher for um, a group of children, including their own and other children in the homeschool co-op. That parent may have an educational background or some degree that helps them to better understand and educate these children. Now, in genuine homeschooling, this is excellent because it does put other eyes on the child. Other people can see the child on a regular basis for whatever reason they're meeting up, whether it's for field trips, whether it's for, yeah, I see that bot. If one of the mods could get it for me, please. Um, but it does put other eyes on children for whatever reason that you're meeting up. What you will notice in the cases that we go over is that there is a significant and glaring lack of any participation in homeschooling co-ops, um, any evidence of field trips, participation in sports events, or anything that takes the child outside of the home. Now that I've psyched my mind up to actually talk about this stuff, the first case that I want to talk about is the Wimbush case, because in this instance, we'll see that both of the parents were college educated. Um, so, just on the surface, if I were the person at the school or school board who would receive intents to homeschool declarations, I would never have thought twice about this. Oh, okay, they've got college degrees, they're well educated, they're socioeconomically sound, you know, they live in a decent neighborhood. Dad was a college star athlete. I would have never thought twice, most likely, that anything might be untoward in this situation. Now, this case was it's a bit hard on the nerves, so just be prepared because some of the details are kind of heavy. And I'm also going to play some of the courtroom footage for you so that you can look into the face of evil, basically, because that woman. Okay, a timeline of events in the felony abuse case of Gwinnett County couple Ricardo and Therian Wimbush. Therian is the mother who was the primary abuser in this particular case. June 2014, Ricardo, 33, and Therian, 37, Wimbush turned themselves in at the Gwinnett County Jail to face allegations that they locked the oldest of their 10 children in a basement bedroom for about 18 months as punishment for allegedly stealing, lying, and implying and improperly touching at least one of his siblings. Um, I'm going to pause right there to say that that particular accusation came across. I watched the entire trial, and that particular accusation came across more as the mother trying to justify the abuse that was dealt to this child and uh, diminish how bad her actions were because she was accusing him of doing such a horrible thing and basically just trying to say, hey, he deserves what he got. He deserved to be locked in the closet. The parent the parents are arrested and jailed on child cruelty charges. The children are taken into state custody. The arrest warrants arose out of an investigation by the Department of Family and Children Services following an anonymous tip. I watched the trial, but I still have not quite been able to wrap my mind around where that tip came from. I probably missed it. I'm gonna tell you some of the stuff that I heard in the trial was so awful that I kind of just tuned out at certain points. The Wimbushes are denied bond and ordered by Gwinnett Chief Magistrate Christina Blum to remain in custody. Blum was afraid that if released, the couple might try to influence the testimony of their children. And if you watch this case, this is the Wimbush case. It is out of Gwinnett County, Georgia. And this was college educated parents who homeschooled their children, and that homeschooling hid some horrific abuses. Uh, Therian Wimbush and Ricardo Wimbush. The Wimbushes are denied bond. Okay, to remain in custody. Blum was afraid that if released, the couple might try to influence the testimony of their children. And you can see that during the course of the trial. Uh, Therian and Ricardo represented themselves. If you do watch the trial, you'll kind of get the feeling that I got that it was mainly her idea to represent herself because of the way that she presented herself over the course of the trial. She was also I think it was a ploy to be able to try to have access to the children for this reason, to influence their testimony through intimidation, um, through that fear mechanism that had been instilled in the children over the course of the abuse they suffered over the years that they were supposedly homeschooled. Um, she did indeed question her own children during the trial. Her phrasing, the questions that she asked, she was very leading, as if she were trying to just push that force to those kids, like to to basically manipulate them through her words and actions to say what she wanted them to say, to frame the abuse in a way that it wasn't abuse. October 2014, the Wimbushes enter a not guilty plea in the felony child abuse case against them. They argue they are properly disciplining the oldest son and protecting the other children from him when they locked him in the basement for 18 months as punishment for various offenses. February 2015, the Wimbushes agreed not to seek custody of their 10 children. The couple remained in jail since being arrested in 2014. The judge allows the Wimbushes to receive letters from their 10 children while in jail. March 2015, the Wimbushes reversed themselves in the previous decision not to seek custody of their 10 children, but the Gwinnett judge rules they cannot change the agreed upon consent order. May 2015, the custody hearing with Gwinnett Juvenile Court, Therian Wimbush testifies about and justifies her decision as a mother, including having a miscarriage at home and burying the baby's remains in a flower garden. Therian says two of the other children helped in preparation for the miscarriage but denied witnessing it. So I highly suggest that you watch the trial or at least watch parts of the trial. There are some, it's beyond harsh punishment. The whole lifestyle was beyond harsh. Um, it's really complicated. It's something that I'm glossing through it tonight, but it may be something that we'll just talk about in depth in another video because there were elements of religious belief that were kind of presented by the Wimbushes at trial, but not really followed through or clarified on. It's like they were trying to throw out hints of this and tinges of that, um, in an effort to really try to defend and diminish the severity of what they had done to their children. So, excuse me. I'm kind of glossing through it tonight because I just want to get this case out there, and then we'll talk about it more maybe in a subsequent live. Theory says two of the show. Okay, um, August 2015, Gwinnett County Superior Court Judge Karen Byers recuses herself from the Wimbush child custody case. Therian Wimbush had filed a lawsuit in June against Byers and 12 other people connected to the case, including two other judges and six Division of Family and Children Services employees for allegedly slandering her family through disparaging statements. So here it's kind of starting to come really clear why I'm saying that Therian was most likely the primary abuser in this case. You can see that she is really manipulative, and the word is right on the tip of my brain for what I want to call her based on these actions. But you can see where it's like she just has to, she's very controlling. She has to control the narrative. She has to control the way everything runs around her and the way people act and interact around her. You will see that more clearly here. And homeschooling really played into that because it put her in a position where she was free to exert as much force, influence, whatever, over her children as she felt necessary. And I'm not diminishing the role of the father in this, but in this case, as well as in the Amani Moss case that we'll talk about in another live, um, it's as if the father was, while they were allowing the abuse and not doing anything to stop it, they weren't really directly abusing the children, but it's almost as if they were abused themselves to the point where they wouldn't even stand up for their own children. They just allowed this to go on. No excuse, because as an adult, even if they were abused, they knew that it was absolutely wrong, the stuff that was going on here. All right. December 2016, the Wimbushes deliver a handwritten plea offer to the Gwinnett District Attorney's Office, asking for their charges to be dropped and for the county to give them more than $500 million in restitutionary redress. Again, you can see here exactly what type of abusive, bossy, pushy personality, a bully that Tyrion is. And you can imagine that if she thinks it's appropriate or okay, or that she can get away with bullying whole state agencies. Yeah, $540 million. They wanted a lot of money, uh, which is crazy. Um, but if she felt like she was able to bully a whole state agency, whole government officials, judiciary officials, can you imagine how real and how severe it actually was for those children who were in the house, who were helpless and powerless up under her? The trial begins in January 2017. Ricardo and Therian Bush are charged with child abuse and false imprisonment. The Wimbushes, who have remained jailed since their arrest in 2014, represent themselves. Now, I'm going to pause right here because a thought came to me. At this trial, evidence was presented to where this young man who they had abused so badly, this boy was so badly abused that when they found him, he actually had mold and fungus growing on his body, out of his skin, because he had not had a bath in 18 months. He had not had clean clothes in 18 months. He had not had clean sheets or anything in 18 months. After going through all of that, this boy actually said that he would be willing to go back into this closet hellhole in the basement just to be able to be back with his family. That is how badly that he was abused, to the point that he thought that it was okay and it was acceptable, and was willing to go back to that because this woman had so strongly ingrained into his mind the ideas that she was trying to put into his head about his abuse and how it was his fault, that he was willing to accept that and even go back to it because he thought that that was okay. With him being homeschooled and being separated and isolated from society, he really didn't have a foundation to compare, to be able to go to a friend's house and see how things run at their friend's house, how his friends' parents might discipline them, how his friends' family might interact with each other, um, or even to just talk to friends about, hey, I got in trouble and my mom and my dad, they grounded me, they took away my PlayStation, um, they took away my allowance for a month, whatever. And to be able to compare that to, God, I took a DVD player to watch a movie and got locked in a closet for 18 months. So he didn't even have anything that he could use as a frame of reference to understand exactly what it is that he was willing to go back to. The psychological effect of the abuse that children suffer under homeschooling. Over the course of me watching these videos and just researching these cases, to me, in in a lot of ways, the psychological abuse and the psychological damage that's done to these kids is just as bad as, and probably even worse than, the physical abuse. Because in the case of the Wimbushes, he wasn't beaten black and blue. He didn't have broken bones. Now, true, he wasn't allowed to bathe, but they fed him every day. Probably not the way he would prefer to eat, but they fed him every day. He had contact every day. He wasn't just like beaten on and kicked around or whatever. But the psychological abuse in this case, I think, was the most impactful, was worse on him. The psychological abuse was worse than the physical abuse in this particular case. And again, homeschooling, isolation, not having a frame of reference, not being able to see how normal families and children and interpersonal interactions go, to even be able to realize what he was going through. Excuse me. January 30th, 2017, Ricardo and Theria Wimbush were each sentenced to 20 years in prison and 10 years probation. They will not be able to contact the two abused sons until each boy is 21 years old. They are currently 16 and 10 years old. The couple is allowed to supervise visitations with their other 8 children, but the parents cannot initiate contact with them. The thing about that whole setup right there, the contact, the I understand that by law parents have rights. You know, you have a right to parent your child. You have a right to make certain decisions. The thing that gets me when I think about the Wimbush case is that after everything that they put their children through, okay, af and although not none of the children died, none of the children were severely, badly, physically abused. One was medically abused, and I will get into that as well, because that really speaks to the homeschooling issue. One of them was medically abused. Even after all this, prison sentences, found guilty, convicted at trial, they still have the option to parent, interact with, communicate with their children. But then we see a case such as Ariel's case, where she was truly loved by her family, by her parents. They just weren't in a position to provide for her basic needs because of their addictions. And they were pushed into a situation where them and their children, to where that whole family dynamic was legally severed, to where legally, by definition, they aren't even Ariel's or her sister's parents anymore. There was no provision that, hey, you can still talk to your kids. You can still communicate with them. You can still have a part in their life. Because legally, when they terminate parental rights in order to make way for adoption, it's on par with a relative dying, because everything about the connection, the legal connection between parent and child, is completely severed. You are legally no longer that child's parent. They're not your kid. There's no right to inherit. There's none of that. But yet you have these people like the Wimbushes who do their children so unspeakably wrong, but they're still like, okay, but you still got the right to be a parent. You still got the right to talk to them. You still got the right to have communication with them. We're just going to put these little limits on it. And in Ariel's case, she was separated from a loving family and placed with two monsters who did unimaginable things to her and caused this child's death. They never loved her. They never cared for her. They never had any true desire for her success, for her to thrive. Not sure if what's not true. I really am not. Well, Karen, I kind of get that, and I'm not really speaking so much for over regulation as I'm speaking for more oversight. There should be something in place to where if a child is homeschooled, there's a mandatory contact with some type of mandatory reporter on a regular basis. Um, Required that they come to a physical school location to take a test or something once a month or once every other month. Some mandate to where homeschooled children aren't just boxed off and separated but to where someone is required to have contact with them on a regular basis to be able to make sure that they're okay. And I'm not for the overregulation, but at the same time, I don't think that there should be such a freely and easily available method for an abuser to have free reign to abuse a kid. Like there's no one that has to be answered to. There's no one. They don't. I don't know. I don't know. It's I don't really have the words to express that right now. But basically, there should be some oversight, some kind of oversight. Um, it's kind of like I got it at the when I was talking about Adam Montgomery and his criminal record and his right to parent. When does a parent's right to parent supersede a child's right to live and thrive and be healthy and happy? There's a small bit, and I'm gonna cut this live here soon. I don't really like to do super long lives. I think I have gotten um, a pretty good introduction to the main idea, the heart of where this series is going to go. And again, like I said, we'll go more in depth in the Wimbush case in a subsequent video. We'll get into some of the things that were presented at trial. I do want to touch on that. The other child who was subject to some severe abuse in the Wimbush family under this guise of homeschooling was a younger brother. He was medically neglected to the point where he had his Therian, the mother at the trial, referred to it as a lump on his stomach. And she really kind of diminished it. You would think that it was just like a bump. Maybe they bumped into something and had a bruise or whatever. What it actually was a tumor that had turned cancerous and had grown in size. It was a tumor which, had it been attended to early on, would have been easily removed through outpatient procedure, and the kid would have had nothing else to worry about. By the time these children were finally rescued from their homeschool horror, the tumor had become cancerous and had grown across his abdomen to the point where at they weren't even sure at one point if he was going to survive. And so this is just another reason that there needs to be more oversight. I'm not saying that uh, homeschooling should have some type of rigorous, you got to check in every week or whatever. But there should be enough mandatory interaction with some type of accountability agency, a school district employee, a doctor, a counselor, maybe some type of requirement that that places requirements for homeschooled children to participate in some activities on a regular basis where they are exposed to other homeschool children and their parents. Something, just any. I don't really have a solution. It's not my place to have a solution. It's my place, I feel, to point out that hey, this is a serious problem and something needs to be done about it. Homeschool kids should not just be thrown to the wolves and everybody, all the teachers and counselors or whatever can just wash their hands and say, oh, I didn't know, I didn't see it, he wasn't in school, she wasn't in school. The fact that we have one child who was imprisoned in a closet for 18 months, kept filthy to the point that he had mold and fungus growing out of his skin, and another child who almost died from a tumor that could easily have been sleuth mom for president. I know, right? That could have easily, it was a medical issue that could have been resolved so quickly, so easily, and fairly painlessly for the child. Even if we were to stop right there and not talk about another case where homeschooling masked abuse, even if we were to stop right there, those two children alone are enough that someone should feel the need to require some oversight. And yeah, it may be a small percentage. It may be a small percentage, but the question that I would pose is the life of one child worth the effort to supervise? If we have 100 kids in homeschool and they're all 99 of them are genuinely homeschooled, well taken care of, they're getting education, but then we have one that's locked in a closet. Does that one deserve for someone to stand up and say, we've got to fix this problem? Does the 99 who aren't being abused make it okay for that one to be left out in the cold? The video, I did want to play just a small clip because I want to go more into that later in another video. We'll go more into the trial, but I want you to get a picture of the mother in this case. And I'm not going to play the audio. I just want you to see a little bit of her in action, her mannerisms. Come on, come on, come on. It's right in here. And just looking at even this little small clip that I'm going to play for you, you're going to understand what I mean when I say she was the primary abuser. Oh, come on. I guess it is not going to play. But she was the primary abuser, and you can see, like, there she is right there. You can see from her behaviors and her actions and mannerisms, you can get a really good understanding of how she handled these kids at home. Just watch her facial expressions, watch her, and we're going to watch a little bit of this in a subsequent video. the forced fake smile. And you'll notice in this little bit that we're watching here, she's in prison guard. Now, she had the option for the whole trial to wear civilian clothes. The way I felt about this was a demonstration of the type of person that she was, the abuse, the manipulation, the mental manipulation that she was doing to these children over the course of time because she didn't even take the time to make herself look presentable. She wanted her children to see her this way. And I feel like she wanted them to see her this way so that they could feel bad about her being locked up or whatever. And they would more easily follow the course she was trying to guide their testimony down. Like, this isn't even normal people facial expressions or body movements or body language or any of that. We're gonna watch that. We're gonna watch one of the we're gonna watch one of the segments of her interviewing or interrogating her children at trial in a subsequent video. This video is now at about 45 minutes. I really don't like to make long lives. And also, you can hear I'm getting over. Everyone in the house was just passing back and forth the COVID or the flu or the combination. I don't know what it was. We were all sick as dogs. So I'm going to stop sniffling in your ear. I want you to really think about some of the information that's been presented here tonight and to join me again. I will try to do this again next week to go on with the second part of the Wimbush case where we get more into what was actually done to these children and why. Um, we're going to talk more about how the lack of socialization and interaction with people outside of the home played into um, the way the children themselves thought about or perceived the abuse that they were going through. We're going to hear some testimony from the caseworker who actually brought this young man out of that closet, and she's going to describe his actions, his words, his behaviors, his appearance, and how all that changed over the course of time. So, if I made any points tonight worth uh, worth considering, worth taking to heart, um, I want to say the fact that homeschooling should not be such a convenient, easily accessible tool of abuse to those who choose to use it for the wrong reasons. Secondly, that homeschooling is a wonderful, wonderful thing when it is employed properly and with clear and pure motives for wanting to homeschool a child. And thirdly and finally, that we need to start considering and presenting ideas of how to better serve children who are homeschooled to help prevent them from being severely abused, even killed under the guise of homeschooling by abusers who know that they can say, hey, I'm going to homeschool and then get away with everything. Thank you guys for joining me. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you will join me again next week. Let's make this a Thursday thing. Thursday, 10:30, homeschooled horrors. And I will see you again. Good night, everybody.